Hello and welcome to a new tutorial. This time we're going to make a logo animation in After Effects. Let's see the preview of this tutorial. I open After Effects and I create a new composition. I name it main comp and the size is 1920 by 1080 pixels. The frame rate is 25 seconds and the duration is 15 seconds and I choose a white background. And then I press OK. Double click to open the Illustrator file of our logo. Change here the setting to Compositions Retain Layer Sizes and press Import. Double click on the composition on the timeline to open it. Now you can see all the layers of the Illustrator file. Select all the layers of the letters and go then to Layer, Pre-compose or use the shortcut. I name it Name Logo and be sure that you select the second option and press then OK. Do the same thing for the icon logo. So I select the icon layer, I go to Layer, Pre-compose and I name it Icon. And also here select the second option and press OK. Press now on the name logo comb to open all the layers of the letters. Now we need to make a background so that we can see what we are doing. So I go to Layer, New, Solid and I choose an almost white color and I name it Background. Drag the background layer under the letter layers and I do the same thing for the icon comp, so I double click to open the icon comp and I create a new solid layer and I drag it again under the icon layer. Now we can really start with the logo animation. Grab the pen tool in the toolbar above and I set the stroke on and I choose a blue color. The color doesn't matter. And I press OK. I set the fill off and now I go over all the lines of the icon logo. You can change the thickness of the stroke a little. It is important that the whole line of the logo is covered. Don't be afraid to go a few steps back. I do this too so that the line is fully covered. I do the same thing for all the other lines. Be sure that you are working on the same layer. Now I will speed up the process a little so that I don't bother you with this. Feel free to pause the video and do it on your own tempo. If you open now the shape layer and open the contents, you see now normally 4 shapes layers. I select the 4 shapes and I go to Add and select Trim Pads. Be sure that all the layers are still selected and open then a Trim Pad layer. I set the end to 0 and I turn on Stopwatch by Start. I go a few frames further and I set it to 100. If we now play it, you see that it is very slow. So I drag the last keyframe to 1 second. And I check it again to play it back. And I drag the keyframe until I'm happy with it. To make it even smoother, I select both keyframes and I ease it by pressing the F9 key on my keyboard. I adjust the smoothness a little with the graph editor. Be sure that you are working on the speed graph. I select the anchor point and I make a more curved line like this. You can play it back to see how it looks. And I'm still trying some things out until I'm happy with it. I go back to my timeline by pressing again the graph icon. I made a little mistake, I only worked on the first line layer. So I open the other trim pad layers and I place them in the same place as the one above. It looks really boring if the lines are moving on the same time, so I move the keyframes from each layer a little bit further. Then I select all the keyframes and I open again the graph editor and I play again with the anchor points to create some smoothness. I create some little mountains of the curved lines. I go back to the timeline and I select all the keyframes and I hold the Ctrl key or the Command key for Mac users and I hold it while I drag it a little bit closer to each other. I go back to the icon comp and I choose by track matte and the icon layer alpha matte shape layer 1 to mask it. And if you play it to see the preview, you can see that the icon logo is animated. Now I will animate the position of the icon logo. I select the icon layer and I press P on my keyboard to open the position. I go a few frames further on the timeline and I turn the stopwatch on to create a keyframe. Then I go to the beginning of the timeline and I change the position of the icon to the center of the canvas. Then I select both keyframes and I press F9 on my keyboard to ease the keyframes. Then I go to the icon comp and I set the background off and I save it. I was not really happy with the speed of the animation, so I go back to the logo comp and I go back to the trim paths of the 4 shapes. I press U on my keyboard to see all my keyframes. Then I select all the keyframes and I hold Alt on my keyboard while I drag the keyframes to the left. I do this so that the speed is a lot quicker. I turn the background on so that I can see the result. If I'm happy with it, I turn the background off, I save it and I go back to my main comp to check it again how it looks now. I select the icon layer and I go back to the edit graph to change the curve a little bit more, like this, a little mountain. Now it is time to animate the name logo, so I open the name logo comp and there you see all the layers of each letters. I turn the background on and I go to view and I turn on view rulers. Then I drag a ruler to the left side of the letter E and I zoom in on the letter E and I drag a second ruler to the other side of the shape of the letter E. I select the layer of the letter E and I press with my right mouse on that layer. I choose Create and I choose the option Create Shapes of Vector Layer. Then I look for a path in the search bar above all the layers. I go a few frames further on the timeline and I turn on the stopwatch of the path layer to create a new keyframe. Then I go to the beginning of the timeline and I take the pen tool and I drag the edges of the letter E between the two rulers to create a rectangle shape. I struggled also a lot with this, but take your time for it. You can pause always the video to do it on your own tempo. I play it to see if the keyframes are good. I place the two keyframes a little bit to each other to make the speed a little bit quicker. Then I select both keyframes and I press F9 again on my keyboard to ease the keyframes for a smoother transition. I close all the layers of the letter E and then I press P for change the position of the letter E, and I make also a keyframe. Then I zoom the canvas out to see the whole word, and I drag the shape of the letter E to the left side of the canvas. I select again both keyframes and I press F9 on my keyboard. I select the two top keyframes and I drag these to the right to align it with the last keyframe of the layer below. And I place the keyframe a bit to each other. I select first the position layer and then I go to the speed graph and I create again a little mountain. And I do this also for the path layer. I play it back to see the end result of what we have now, and I'm really happy about this already. I select all the layers except the letter E and I pre-compose these layers, and I name it T and I set the second option on. I take the rectangle tool and I make a rectangle shape to cover all the letters. I turn off the stroke and I set the fill to a white color. And I make sure that all the letters are covered. I drag the rectangle shape before the shape of the letter E. Then I drag the layer under the letter E layer and I rename this to Reveal to keep it organized. Then I link the reveal layer to the outline letter E layer. Then I turn the layer T to Alpha Matte Reveal. I go to the main comp and I set the name logo comp visible and I play it so that I can see how it looks. I want that the name logo comes later onto the screen, so I drag the timeline from that layer a little bit further when the icon logo is on the position that he needs to be. That looks really good already. I was only not so happy with the speed of the name logo, so I go again to the name logo comp and I turn the background on. I select the three last keyframes and I drag this a little bit to the first keyframe. And I change also the last keyframe of the letter E to drag this also closer to the keyframe before. And then I turn again the background off and I go back to my main comp to see the whole logo animation. Let me know in the comments which logo I need to animate, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. I hope you liked this video and I hope I see you by the next tutorial. Thanks for watching.